Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast that gives you in-depth recommendations on new rock and roll books and documentaries. Looking for a good book or doc to check out? Well, here comes the inside scoop and all the details on the top recommendations and hidden gems you don't want to miss. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. And today the spotlight falls on the book Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell by Ann Powers. And every now and then you have to challenge yourself. And I definitely stepped out a little here with taking on reading this book. And there are a few reasons for that. Joni Mitchell is one, and the author Ann Powers is the other. Is Joni Mitchell a rocker? Does she fall under the Rock Talk Studio umbrella that mainly covers the classic rock years of the 60s through the 90s? And the question I wrestled with the most, will you, the people that listen to the podcast, be interested in this? Joni Mitchell has always interested me. I like a lot of her music, and I know a little bit about her, and that right there, I have to say, is the main reason I jumped in. I wanted to know more. And when you look at it, that is really the driving force behind this podcast, and what I love most about doing this. And that is to learn more about the art form known as rock and roll through the medium of books and docs. So let's put the discussion of is Joni a rocker to the side for a bit. Let's look at the second challenge here, and that is author Ann Powers. Ann is a highly decorated music critic, one of the best. She's done it for over 30 years for NPR, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, a lot of other publications. If you've ever heard her work or if you've heard her on NPR, you know she is very intelligent. Why would that challenge me? Because the way she has chosen to write this book. And this book is written like nothing I've ever featured on this podcast before. Powers is extremely insightful and leans into her critic persona instead of just writing a biography about Joni Mitchell. This is not a biography. It's not a straight telling of Mitchell's life. Powers explores and questions Mitchell's ways and looks at her own life and how she has dealt with similar situations and feelings. She uses Joni's life to answer questions in her own life and wrestles with some of the uncomfortable places that takes her. It's a study of Mitchell's creativity and how it reverberated in so many different directions. It's a deep look at Mitchell's music and the way she navigated her life as a woman artist and how that affected not only Joni, but Powers as well. There is a lot here about culture, about feminism, about race, and it gets heavy, veering away from Mitchell a little too much for me at times, but it's done with such interesting questioning and exploration that by challenging myself to hang in there, I developed a new insight on a multitude of facets that Joni Mitchell created, not only with her music, but with her lifestyle. The chapters are like giant think pieces and are really packed with commentary. Example, she doesn't just look at Mitchell's time with her different loves. She opens up conversations about society's views about women in relationships, different to the free love period Mitchell came up in. She deeply examines Mitchell's role as a woman around all the men she was creating with during her Laurel Canyon days, even taking a look at what I thought was a really interesting question of why didn't Crosby, Stills, and Nash ask Mitchell to join their band? There's also a lot of deep examination of Joni's navigation through the music scene and the different creative avenues she explored. Mitchell took a lot of chances and worked in and out of a lot of different genres, and the book opens up some of the hows and whys of her many different paths. There are a lot of pages spent on examples of how the record industry not only treated Mitchell, but women during that time. What I liked is how Powers points out that Mitchell had managed what only a few other women could. She moved through her time with the boys and came out her own woman. Most books make me stop and go and listen to the artist's music, but this one, because the author interjects so much insight, I got lost for hours in a Joni whirlwind. And this is where Powers really shines when she is reviewing the records. This is definitely her wheelhouse, especially on the chapter of Joni's masterpiece, Blue. She lingers here for a while and checks back to Blue multiple times throughout the book because of the depth of the record and how it stands as such a strong marker in Mitchell's career. If this doesn't make you want to go listen to Blue by Joni Mitchell, nothing will. This is a different book in a lot of ways, and it really comes down to the way the author approaches its subject. Instead of telling the story, the author is digging. And when she finds something she's not in line with and doesn't understand, she digs deeper. There was a really strange time, I don't know if you're aware of this, I wasn't, this one blew me away, in Joni Mitchell's career where she created an alter ego called Art Nouveau, and it was a black male pimp. She painted her face black and posed as a black artist. Powers, like most, had a hard time understanding this and was very, very vocal about how she didn't agree with this choice by Mitchell and didn't want to just brush it under the rug like most critics did. She even went as far as to reach out to scholar Miles Greer, and she printed the conversation in the book, to consult her on her feelings about this and to ask for help in trying to understand this very controversial, even to this day, move by Mitchell. Powers never spoke to Mitchell for the book. She didn't want to, and she never tried at all to make Mitchell out as a hero. That's one of the strong points to the story. The author is on a journey to do her best to figure out someone she knows she will probably never figure out. And she realizes that and does a great job at pointing out that Mitchell really can't be defined. Powers positions this story as a journey of not only Joni Mitchell's life, but also Ann Powers' life. And Powers uses Joni as a flashlight. And what has made Joni Mitchell so interesting is her desire to learn and follow new paths. That path includes multiple detours both by Joni and Powers' writing, which at times got a little too deep for me, and it did bog down a little, though redeemed itself by the admirable search for the heart of a lot of the questions that come with all the different sides of Joni Mitchell. This is an intimate book with a ton of analysis, but one that once I stepped back and I put it down and I closed that final page, I found myself missing the world that Powers created. Not just the Joni world, but the traveling that was done to a myriad of interesting and thought-provoking places. Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell is 404 pages and is written by Ann Powers. Okay, I pushed it aside at the beginning of this discussion, and it's time to look at it. It's this week's one big question, and I'm going to go for it now. Is Joni Mitchell a rock and roller? If you're a longtime listener of the show, you know that I've been in the last month on a quest to get 25 Apple Podcasts 5-star reviews, and I'm almost there. I've got 20. I started off at 12, so thank you everybody who has left a review. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Chris in New Hampshire. Great rating and review. I really appreciate it. And DB Jax, who just left me one today. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the support. So I need 5 more. So all you need to do, and I realize this, is if you click on just giving me a 5-star review and not write something, it doesn't count towards the 25. So all you need to do is write a little bit about how much you enjoy the show. I need 5 more, 1 more week to go. So let's see if I can get the community here, the Rock Talk Studio community, to step up and help me out. I really appreciate it. You know I like to help out other podcasts too, especially rock and roll podcasts. I listen to a bunch of them. Then I'd like to turn you on to one today. It's called the Rock and Roll Autopsy. It's put together by a bunch of guys. It is a fun rock and roll show. It's a great podcast. Here is their awesome trailer.
Ever wonder if rock and roll is dead?
Does the music we grew up loving align with modern sensibilities?
Or should it be relegated to the dustbin of regrettable rock history? My name is Scott.
And this is Rico. We are your rock and roll pathologists.
Join us as we take your favorite songs and put them under the knife every week on Rock and Roll Autopsy.
New episodes every Sunday at midnight, wherever you stream your podcasts.
The Rock and Roll Autopsy Podcast.
Rock and Roll Autopsy Podcast. Check those guys out. Great show. You're going to love it. All right, let's move on now to today's one big question about the book Traveling on the Path with Joni Mitchell. It's time to answer the question, is Joni Mitchell a rocker? And I'm going to answer that by digging a little bit deeper into this book because I want to steer you in the right direction. If you're thinking about picking up this book, I want to give you as much information as possible. This book features talks with Graham Nash, James Taylor, David Crosby, Neil Young, to name a few. Rock royalty, indeed. Bob Dylan is discussed, as is Joni's time on Dylan's Rolling Thunder Revue tour. So rocker in a sense of the way rocker can be defined, especially in the gray areas that people like Joni fall in. Sure, I could see that. Jazz artist or jazz fusion artist, now that's a tag I'm a little bit more comfortable with, and so is author Ann Powers in this book. There is a lot of pages dedicated to the jazz world and Joni's connection to many jazz artists. Again, this book is challenging. It sits on the line of so many different subjects. Like Mitchell as an artist, this book, it opens up a lot of questions about a myriad of things. A lot of those questions, after a lot of exploration, come with no answers, or at least no definitive answer, kind of like the question, is Joni Mitchell a rocker? So let me put it another way. Does Joni Mitchell fall under the umbrella of rock and roll that I usually talk about on this podcast? No, not really. I don't think so. But I do think if you want to try something different, experience an interesting writing style about an amazing artist, I would recommend you checking out this book. Coming up in next week's podcast, it's all the latest book buzz and documentary news featuring bands that just released new projects. There's work from Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, other artists with new books and docs coming out, Rush, John Lennon. There's new Dylan news, Paul McCartney, a lot of heavy hitters in this one. Don't miss the show next week. A lot of great info about a lot of really cool stuff coming down the line. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and being able to give you the scoop on a title I think is worth your time and money, like today's recommended title, the book Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell. If you want up-to-the-minute news on what's new in the world of rock and roll books and docs, make sure to follow the Rock Talk Studio on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and YouTube. Give me a follow for all the good stuff about all the new stuff. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.